Thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. This is going to be the second webinar in our urban forestry education series titled Urban Trees in Your Backyard. For any information regarding upcoming webinars, you can visit our website at ccenassau.org. We have 6 webinars in total in this series. Any questions regarding the webinar, you can send us an email to nassau@cornell.edu. We will be holding all questions till the end of the webinar. So if you have a question related to the webinar presentation, you can either use the chat function on the bottom of the webinar, or you can send a question to the Q&A function, and we will be answering all questions at the end of the webinar. If you have any specific questions regarding a tree in your own backyard, we'd encourage you to use our diagnostic hotline at nassau@cornell.edu. You can send a picture and any questions you have about your own personal tree directly to that line, and we'll be in contact with you. There will be some ISA CEU credits provided for this webinar. If you would like to receive credits for attendance, at the end of the webinar, we will be collecting your ISA certification numbers, so you can send your full name and your ISA certification number into the chat function, and we'll be awarding credits afterwards. Support for this program does come from the New York State DEC from their Urban and Community Forestry program. If you guys have any questions about the DEC USF program or would like to send some notes of gratitude, you can send us an email. We'd be happy to forward that information along. If that's all, then we'll turn it over to Vinny and he can begin.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone out there. Vinny Javutsky here. I feel like this is sort of a fireside chat every Monday night. It's good to see all the folks that are attending. A lot of the names I'm familiar with, so hello to everyone again. Tonight we're going to talk about wildlife and the benefits that trees provide wildlife. And we're going to go a little bit beyond that because both trees and wildlife provide benefits to us, people, humans, and are an important part of our whole ecosystem. So we're going to kind of dive into that. And so these are 2 of my favorite topics, trees and wildlife. And so let's get started. And so before we get started, I just wanted to let me just get some stuff out of my way on my screen here. Can everybody hear me? If not, just put it in the chat, and hopefully I'll. There we go. Okay, so what I wanted to do was kind of define what urban forestry is, because for many folks, basically it may be a little confusing, and it's sort of a new term that really has been wasn't around maybe 25, 30 years ago. So urban forestry, the definition of it would be the management of urban trees and associated resources to sustain urban forest cover, health, and numerous socioeconomic and ecosystem services is known as urban forestry. According to the U.S. Forest Service, urban forestry is the management of trees really in everywhere in a community where people live. Let me just, the importance of trees for the environmental wellness is urban and community forests contribute energy savings, better air and water quality, reduce stormwater runoff, carbon storage, and increase property values. As natural elements of a built landscape, trees improve urban life and they're critical to human health and emotional well-being. And that's from the U.S. Forest Service, from an article from October 2016. So as you can see, it's relatively new. It's not that 2016 was the year that they started using that phrase, but that was from a document that I had come across. A lot of people, when I talk to them about and use the term urban forestry in Nassau County or Suffolk County, they're kind of turned off by that because they really feel it's suburban, and maybe we're not urban, and it's kind of confusing. But let me show you what the U.S. Forest Service thinks about us. Now, this is a U.S. Forest Service map of the United States. It's from 2014, so it's rather relative and current. This is the population density of the United States, and if you look at Long Island, it's a bright red. And if we go down this chart on the side here, now this is population by county. So what I was able, and so the bright red area is 1 million to 400,500,000 people in a county. Now on Long Island, we have Nassau and Suffolk County, but we also have some other counties to the west of us, Queens County, Kings County, so on and so forth. But we're going to specifically talk more about Nassau County and Suffolk County. Nassau County's population is currently 1.4 million people, and it covers 453 square miles. Suffolk County, on the other hand, is a little closer to a population of 1.5 million, and it covers a larger land area of 2,373 miles. So what that does is it gives both counties, if you combine them and you figure out what the average for those two counties, the population average is per square mile, we're talking that there's over 1,000 people per square mile in Nassau and Suffolk County. And most of the time that urban is used, it's used in a way to describe populations of 500 people or greater per square mile. Or a lot of times they will also use a metric of 25% or less of the land being used for agricultural purposes. So again, as you can see, Nassau County is quite urban, so that's why we get that name. And that's why we're talking about urban forestry. As you can see, the rest of New York State has a lower county population. And of course, that's where you would find forestry in the traditional sense as a way of managing trees and almost, in essence, farming the trees, harvesting trees as a commodity to be included as part of the economy. So we don't really have any of that going on Long Island. So it's basically all urban. So, we're going to move on because I want to really get into the importance of trees to us and to the wildlife that we have. And we do have a lot of wildlife here on Long Island. So let's move on. So benefits of trees, there's many. I've listed 22 here actually, this is from a group called Tree People. They're in California, and I thought they do a good job of listing a lot of the important benefits. I'm sure there's 22 here, but there's only 11 on this page, but I'm sure that there's, dozens or even 100 more benefits of trees. So this first page, we kind of, know that trees combat climate change. That's been in the news. Everybody seems to know it. Whenever I talk to school kids, they certainly know that. And, I ask them why are trees so important when I go to a class or a group of school kids, and the top three are usually these top three right here. They combat climate change, trees clean the air, trees provide oxygen, trees cool the streets and the city by providing shade, and that has other health benefits. It, allows people to get outdoors and perhaps exercise more, and that's related to health issues, reducing diabetes, and hopefully fighting off heart disease, and so on and so forth. The cleaning of the air, number two, also relates to reducing health problems like asthma. A lot of children suffer from asthma and other respiratory problems that are made worse by the air, the particulates in the air, the pollution in the air, and trees definitely help with that. It's been proven that well-treed communities, communities that have a great population of trees, typically suffer less from these respiratory ailments. Number five, trees conserve energy. They reduce energy costs for cooling, for air conditioning, and for heating as well. Trees save water. They slow the rain down. They direct rainwater to the ground, slowing it down, allowing it to be absorbed into the soil more effectively and efficiently. That prevents runoff. And when you have a lot of runoff where there's no trees and you're not slowing down the rain water, the storm water, it runs off the land. It runs off, especially the paved areas, into the streets and parking lots. And it winds up going into storm drains and streams. And then it winds up in our groundwater and in our oceans, bays. And it, along the way, picks up a lot of pollution, a lot of things we don't want in our groundwater and in our bays and oceans. So trees are important for filtering water. Trees help prevent soil erosion. Certainly, we don't have, hopefully, a lot of that around here, but when we do have a construction site or we do have major projects that remove trees, that will often lead to a lot of the soil being washed away. Other parts of the country may have higher elevations or hillier landscapes, and that's an issue with that. But it's still important here on Long Island to maintain as much of the soil as we can here. Trees, because they provide shade, they shield children from ultraviolet rays. They help reduce skin cancer. So they provide, respite from the full sun situation that one might find. I always find when I go by athletic field, a lot of times everybody's on a hot sunny day huddled around or under the trees because it's shady there, it's cooler there. I also notice that a lot of people park in the parking lots where the trees provide shade. And, I wonder if these are really tree loving people that are doing that, or they're just, taking advantage of this. I always thought that the shady treed areas and parking lots should be reserved for people like us who like trees, who love trees, the tree huggers, basically. So as an added benefit of being an advocate for trees. Trees provide food. Certainly, I get this answer from the kids all the time, fruit trees, nut trees, but trees also provide food for wildlife, other animals. That's what they do as part of their reproductive process of producing seed to refurbish their populations, producing the fruit that protects the seed inside, like an apple, and the nuts that are actually the seeds of those trees. Trees heal. That's something that sometimes people find surprising. Every day there's more and more research on the healing impact of trees. You know, I've seen studies that have shown that patients with even just simply by having a view of trees out their windows will heal faster with less complications, less medication, less time to be released from the hospital. Children with ADHD show fewer symptoms when they have access to nature, and green spaces, and trees. It's also been, there's been studies where exposure to trees and nature aids in concentration with school children, reducing mental fatigue, actually improving test scores. You know, it just seems to go on and on what the benefits of trees are. And let's move on to some of the interesting benefits of trees. Trees reduce crime, violence, neighborhoods and homes that are barren in communities where there's no trees show a greater incidence of violence in and out of the home than their greener counterparts. Trees and landscaping help to reduce the level of fear. Yeah, so it's a psychological benefit. Trees mark the seasons. If you want to know what time of year it is, just look out at the trees. You know, this time of year, you got the beautiful autumn colors, the leaves are falling, you know right away looking out the window, it's autumn. Trees create economic opportunities, actually. You know, we talked about trees producing food. Fruit harvested from community orchards can be sold. Lots of communities now are planting orchards on community property, on municipal property, and they're harvesting it and selling it, or giving it to food shelters, food banks, for those that are in need. Small business opportunities in green waste management and landscaping arise when cities value mulching and its water-saving qualities. Vocational training for youth interested in green jobs is also a great way to develop economic opportunities around trees. Trees are teachers and playmates, whether as houses for children or creative and spiritual inspiration for adults. Trees have provided the space for human retreat throughout the centuries. Trees bring diverse groups of people together. Tree plantings provide an opportunity for community involvement, empowerment, and improves the quality of life in our neighborhoods, and all the cultures, ages, and genders have an important role to play at a tree planting or tree care event. Trees add unity. Trees are often used as landmarks. They can give a neighborhood a new identity and encourage civic pride. Trees provide canopy and habitat for wildlife. We're going to get in more depth in a few minutes on that. Sycamore and oak trees are among the many urban species that provide excellent urban homes for birds, bees, possums, squirrels, and the like. Trees block things. Trees can mask concrete walls or parking lots and unsightly views. They muffle sound from nearby streets and freeways and create an eye-soothing canopy of green. Trees absorb dust and wind and reduce glare from sunlight mirroring off of a building or from traffic at night. So there's even at night, trees can have a benefit. Trees provide wood. We all know that many of our homes are built from wood, and many of the products in our, or the furniture in our homes, but the list goes on and on. Wood is used for fuel. I mean, there's so many uses for for wood. There's urban programs, municipality programs where they're recycling a lot of the wood from older homes that are being torn down for reuse, sort of a recycling program. So that's becoming more and more popular, and you're seeing it more and more in communities. Trees increase property values. Everybody likes to get more for their house when they sell it. Trees are a thing of beauty. They do improve the looks of your home, but they can also increase your property value by 15 to 20% or even more. Many people move into neighborhoods because they like the look and feel. They can't quite put their finger on it, but oftentimes it's associated with trees and landscapes that are being well maintained. And trees also are responsible for driving traffic in business areas and downtown areas where there's opportunities for trees to provide cooling shade and opportunities for store owners to utilize the shade outdoors. We saw that this summer with the restaurants opening up again and outdoor dining, happening everywhere. Those business areas that have a lot of trees sort of have a natural, more pleasant atmosphere just because the trees are there. So, it's often a goal of many communities to get more trees into those business areas. There are research that shows that when business areas are well treed, that business can improve by 15 or 20% as well. So those are the 22 benefits from the treepeople.org organization. I love them. I use them all the time. I tell people about them. But, again, like I said, there's many more. We're focusing on wildlife tonight. So why is wildlife important? And we're going to connect the two, the wildlife and the trees, in a few moments. But wildlife maintains balance in our ecosystems. Every living thing is connected, and wildlife is an important part of a healthy environment. Number two, diversity means healthier ecosystems. So wildlife, and when we say wildlife, we need to include not only animals, but all of the plants. I mean, it's all connected. So, the more diverse it is, the healthier the ecosystems are. Wildlife provides nutrients to humans. We know that. There's a lot of agroforestry that's starting to develop now. Agroforestry is the utilizing of natural resources in areas that might economically and agriculturally sustain a community. So you're finding more and more people going out and harvesting from natural areas, purposely planting tree species that provide fruit and nuts and so on and so forth. It just goes on and on. And we know that a lot of these natural foods are more nutritious and healthier for us as well as for animals. A lot of medicine does come from wildlife and wild areas. I know we tend to think that it's always the rainforest, but in order to maintain diversity throughout the globe, we really need to keep in mind that we need to keep all of our ecosystems healthy. Many medical systems, like the traditional Chinese medicine, even today still relies on herbs, spices, and more. But even pharmaceuticals wouldn't be where they are today without wildlife. Medicines like morphine, penicillin, and aspirin were derived from wild plants. When searching for cures to diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's, researchers still look to nature. The more wildlife options they have to study, the better. Number 5, protecting wildlife and their habitats means that there are fewer diseases that affect humans. We know this now with COVID-19 going on. The preservation of wildlife and where they live is important for human health. In diverse protected natural areas, there are fewer instances of malaria and Lyme disease. 60% of infectious diseases, including COVID-19, they think comes from animals. Proximity to animals increases the risk for diseases, changing and jumping species. By protecting habitats, humans and wildlife don't have to live so close together. Number 6, people depend on wildlife for their livelihoods. For many people, wildlife is their main source of income. Here on Long Island, we're surrounded by water, and fishing is a big industry here on Long Island. It's becoming more and more devastated by the decline of the quality of the water, pollution. At one time, all you had to do was walk out into a bay and move your feet a little bit around in the sand, and you could find clams and other animals. Like you could go out and fish for crabs that were in great abundance at one time, and fishing was easy. Now it's not so much. Pollution has depleted a lot of our natural fish stocks and has put a lot of people out of work. I don't think anybody aspires anymore to go out to sea to be a fisherman anymore, but it still happens all the time. And we might be able to turn that around if we, do the right thing. Out in the world, according to the World Economic Forum, $44 trillion, that's actually more than half the world's gross domestic product, is tied to nature. In the global south, 1.6 billion people depend on forests. Globally, 3/4 of jobs depend on water, natural water sources. As wildlife and their habitats shrink, jobs are lost. Wildlife has cultural significance. The impact of wildlife that wildlife has on culture can't be ignored. The presence of animals and plants has always been influenced by in things like religion, religious beliefs, foods. In many indigenous groups, sage is a vital herb for religious ceremonies. The followers of Hinduism, elephants and cows are sacred symbols. Regional dishes made with local ingredients preserve memory and tradition, while also bringing communities together to keep culture and traditions alive. It's important to protect wildlife. Wildlife is important for the economy. Wildlife conservation areas and preserved natural habitats attract visitors from all over the world. Many places depend on wildlife tourism, which makes up for over 10% of the world's gross domestic product. Countries like Brazil, Australia, Kenya, and more are especially dependent on tourism. Without wildlife, the economy of many countries would suffer significantly. Protecting wildlife creates more jobs. Speaking of the economy, wildlife preservation also creates more jobs. As an example, big conservation and sustainable management projects all over the world provides income for tens of thousands to millions of people. According to the research from Heidi Peltier, a research professor and expert in employment in the U.S. economy, conservation and park development creates significantly more jobs than oil and gas. The creation of green jobs leads to more sustainable and productive economies. Being around wildlife and nature is just simply good for your mental health. And I think that's probably why a lot of us are interested in that, in wildlife. and doing what we can for wildlife. There's a global mental health crisis going on right now. Evidence shows that nature can help. People who live close to natural environments and wildlife are found to be more active, emotionally strong, and physically healthier. In one project in the United Kingdom, volunteers with poor mental health took part in nature walks and conservation work. After 12 weeks, they reported feeling better. To protect our mental health, we need to protect wildlife and the habitats that they live in. So where do we start? Well, when it comes to wildlife, trees and people are connected. I'd like to share this thought-provoking quote. I find it inspiring. I came across it a while ago. It was written by a teacher in a publication called Small Things Considered. It's an online blog. It's the American Society for Microbiology's blog. And I'm always interested in things small and large and everything in between. So that's why I poke around in some of these websites and in these publications. All living things are connected to other living things, to what can be described as the global ecosystem, with the foundation of this global ecosystem being microbes. Microbial organisms such as bacteria and fungi play a much greater role than their small size would suggest. And I like that because I make the connection with, I do a lot of the diagnostic work at Cooperative Extension, and I'm always dealing with, diseases that are caused by fungus and by bacteria and all other, what seems to be invisible problems, even viruses. And lately viruses are on my mind because of COVID-19. But, I also know that our microbiome, is important to good health. We're finding out more and more that these microorganisms, such as bacteria and fungi, play an important role in our gut flora and fauna and in good health. And, everybody's on, probiotics and prebiotics. And, basically what that is it's the microorganisms that are in soil and on our foods and almost everywhere. And they're in our body. Scientists estimate that there's probably about 5 pounds of these microbes in everybody's body. So, and if you don't have the right balance and the right types of these microbes, it's hard to maintain good health. So I'm not an expert in that, but I do kind of try to keep myself aware of these things. And I do try to eat healthy and feed the microbiomes in my gut. So, and then this is a quote I'd like to share as well. And this one, I came across this many years ago. And in fact, if you look over my right shoulder, I do have the full version of it hanging in my home. This is just a small part of it. This is by Chief Seattle. He was a chief of 2 tribes in the Pacific Northwest of the United States during the late 1700s to early 1800s. He was famous for this speech. He was widely regarded as one of the most important figures among Native Americans for his efforts to accommodate the white settlers in the United States. And he was a big advocate for caring for the environment. And this is from one of his speeches, which is quite extensive, but this is one that really touches me. Is I'll read it. The earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. All things are connected, like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. And Chief Seattle, I think, hit it right, the nail right on the head when it comes to caring for the earth, caring for ourselves, caring for others. So it's always been part of my philosophy from the day that I first discovered it years ago. So what does this all have to do with what we're talking about, the benefits of trees for wildlife? Well, I just wanted to point out that it really is that we are all connected, all living things, and we're responsible for the well-being of all, our fellow humans, as well as the animals and the trees and all the plants and all the living things out there. Everything from the smallest microbe to the largest living organism and oldest organism. And I think trees are probably some of the biggest. I mean, think of the giant sequoias out in California, in the Pacific Northwest. They're dependent on the smallest of microbes in the soil that they live in, that their roots gather nourishment from. So it's all connected. So let's move on and see what really makes a difference. So I think urban trees make a really big difference. We live in an urban setting, as the first few slides showed. And urban trees do make a difference. Every landscape is comprised of an assortment of dominant land cover. Here on Long Island, there's a rich assortment of natural woods, salt and freshwater, marshlands, grasslands, farms, and ever-growing urban lands that include homes, schools, parks, commercial and industrial use lands. Scattered throughout are patches and corridors like ponds and lakes, stormwater basins, streams, roads. Think of the green spaces that flank the parkways and expressways, the fence rows, and all the underutilized parcels of land waiting for development. Many wildlife species inhabit and dominate these areas, while other animals prefer to live in smaller patches and corridors, maybe even in your own backyard. But these play an important role with connecting wildlife to habitat resources they depend on to live and thrive. Over the years, development by humans have altered, reduced, or totally eliminated natural areas and the vegetative diversity wildlife depends on, leaving behind fragmented habitats and landscapes. Often trees are the first to go as a result of this development, leaving behind a big hole in the wildlife habitat and a reduction of resources and a reduction of travel corridors for wildlife, corridors that connect one patch of habitat to another, making it ever more difficult for wildlife to travel between remaining patches of habitat. Perhaps you've seen it. I do hear these stories about new homeowners who buy a home in our neighborhoods, and the first thing they do is remove the trees. And yet, it might have been because of the trees that they preferred to be in that neighborhood, in our neighborhood. So, hopefully some of this will encourage you to go out and talk to your neighbors and educate your neighbors about trees and the benefits trees provide humans and wildlife. I think trees can help wildlife in a big way. And, we've gone through some tree loss lately. We talk about deforestation and it's always like it's happening somewhere else. But I know that the tree canopy is declining anywhere from 2 to 5% every year on Long Island. And it's been doing that since the 1930s and 40s, with the development, especially with the development of a lot of the housing tracts out in Suffolk County that were once wooded areas, once pine barrens, once oak forest, oak woods are now homes. And that's okay, because we're going to discuss how maybe we can reforest these areas and provide wildlife the habitat, or try to get as close to the habitat that the wildlife once had. Trees can help in a big way, I think. So I just show you that this is typically what, if you took a shot from above, what our communities do look like. Lots of houses, but think about, your community. There's lots of green spaces. There's lots of open space. And they tend to be all connected, whether somebody planned it or not. Just think of the parkways. And, when you drive along the Meadowbrook Parkway or the Wantor Parkway, Saginaw Coast, the East and West Parkways, like the Northern State and the Southern State Parkway, it's flanked on both sides with green space. And I sometimes see some amazing things. Lately, I'm seeing some really amazing things in eastern Nassau County along the Northern State Parkway. At the Suffolk County Nassau border, in the morning, I see deer. And sometimes on my way home, especially when COVID-19 was keeping everyone home back in April, March, April, May, deer were browsing along the sides of the Southern State Parkway, the Northern State Parkway, and the Wantaw and Meadowbrook Parkway. I even saw deer in Oyster Bay. I was on my way up to Planting Fields Arboretum on Mill Road. That's the road that takes you north off of Northern Boulevard. And there were deer and wild turkeys along that road on my way to Planting Fields Arboretum. So wildlife is really slowly but surely, I would say, coming back or taking advantage of some of the urban forests that we have, and we can help with that. Maybe we don't want deer. I mean, they are, deer. There's no place for deer really on Long Island with our roadways and our traffic and everything like that. But if deer and wild turkeys are coming back, I got to believe that with a little help, a lot of the wildlife will come back. If you're a birder and bird watching is your thing, we have a vast array of wild birds, songbirds, migratory birds. We're on the migratory, corridor, Long Island, and we get everything. I look out my kitchen window to a backyard filled with trees and shrubs, and as the seasons change, I see quite an assortment of different types of birds. So they're out there when you start looking for them. This is one of them. This is a bluebird. The bluebird is it's the New York State bird. Bluebirds are insect eaters. They tend to want to be in habitats that are open fields, but we do have open fields here on Long Island in many communities, and bluebirds you'll find in kind of more quiet, more peaceful communities, but they're there. They may not be in the middle of traffic in the middle of Long Island on Hempstead Turnpike or Jericho Turnpike, but if you go back into some of the communities, you will find them. And as I mentioned, deer are becoming more and more abundant on Long Island. The snapping turtle, these are not uncommon if there's freshwater ponds around or lakes. And almost everybody probably has or sees rabbits. You know, they're a common sight along the parkways and in open areas. They're very common at East Meadow Farm. We seem to have a rabbit habitat. They breed in the rose garden. Things have been quiet this spring, so I'm sure they've been very successful this year. So, you know, they're all around us if you take a moment to really take some time and observe and look for them. And even some of the predators are coming back. I do see fox. I often see the fox at larger open spaces. Planyfields Arboretum, I see red foxes all the time. They're around because there's something for them to eat. So that means that there's an abundance of other smaller mammals and other wildlife that these higher level predators can feed on. And again, it's a whole connection. It's a whole cycle of life. The smaller animals live on the microbes and the small insects and invertebrates that live in the soil and above the soil under the leaf litter. And larger animals feed on it, and those animals get preyed upon by higher level predators like the fox, like the hawks, like the eagles that we now have on Long Island. So trees create a habitat. You know, think about, you know, what animals need. And we're going to get a little more into that, but you know, they occupy a space, a square footage, but they also occupy the vertical space. And that's the benefits that trees provide. The off the ground space that many animals need. Birds, as well as small mammals like raccoons, possums, squirrels. You know, the list goes on and on. We'll get into that in a minute. So let's talk a little bit about what does wildlife need? All wildlife, plants and animals alike, require an environment that's best suited to their needs to thrive. Animals need a unique combination of food, water, cover, and territory. An area that provides all of these is called a habitat. How these features are woven together affect the quality of the habitat. Throughout the year, all the elements must be adequately met to meet the seasonally changing needs of wildlife. Let's discuss some of these key components of wildlife habitats in a more in-depth way. Let's talk a little bit about food. Wildlife food preferences and diets change seasonally. Trees and shrubs provide seeds, nuts, fruits, and berries. Some animals also eat leaves, twigs, buds, roots, leaves, stems of grasses, mosses, and lichens that are found in wooded environments. Many of the animals also eat other animals, smaller invertebrates to perhaps small mammals. During breeding season, many nesting bird species will have diets that may change from primarily seed, nut, fruits, and berries to higher sources of proteins and fats, like from insects and other small animals that provide nutrition for egg laying and for feeding young. Trees and shrubs are often hosts to many insect species like butterflies, moths, other pollinators, beetles, whose larvae, such as caterpillars and borers, feed on tree leaves and under tree bark and in the leaf litter below. Let's take an oak tree, for instance. The northern red oak, it's considered to be what is called a keystone species, a species on which other species in an ecosystem largely depend. They're one of the more important tree species in our natural areas. If these species, these keystone species are removed from an ecosystem, it would have a drastic change in the ecosystem. It would even be devastating. Mature oaks are known to host and support over 280, some say up to 500 species of insects, if you include all the different varieties, many of which are pollinators and beneficial insects, as well as birds and other wildlife. One of the most devastating losses of a keystone species was the loss of the American chestnut tree. That tree was amazing. It was widespread throughout the East Coast at one time, and it supported such an abundance of wildlife that I don't think the impact of its loss ever was replaced by some of the other keystone tree species out there, like the oaks. So once a species is gone, it's hard to come back. I know they're working on the chestnut project and getting chestnuts that are resistant to the chestnut blight that devastated the population. But it's going to take time, and maybe one day it will return in the great abundance that it once existed here on the East Coast, and that would be a big benefit to wildlife. So in addition, the red oak trees generally grow to about 75 feet tall and about 30 feet wide in urban areas. They can get bigger in the wild. And they can live a long time, sometimes hundreds of years, providing lots of benefits to people and wildlife for a long, long time. Remember, big trees, big benefits for a long time. Storms have knocked down over the past 10 years or so many of the larger trees, and we really are running a deficit on large trees in our Nassau and Suffolk County areas, and it's having a negative impact on wildlife. Takes a long time to get an oak tree up to 75 feet. Those trees are probably in the neighborhood of about 100 years old to reach that point. So that's a long time. But even after an oak tree dies in a natural area, especially, or maybe in a urban area, maybe on a home lot, it can continue to support wildlife as it decomposes and feeds beetles and larvae, worms, snails, termites, ants, slugs, and other invertebrates that live in the decomposing logs and help turn the wood into humus, which enriches the soil. These invertebrates, in turn, can serve as food for small animals like moles, box turtles, snakes, frogs, salamanders, and a whole lot more animals. In the natural areas, if a tree dies, and there's definitely no one around or no target to fall on, one of the best things you can do is leave the tree alone. We call it a snag. When the tree is left standing, a snag. It provides a home and food for many, many animals for many, many years to come. So if you happen to have a tree that dies on your property and you have the opportunity to leave it alone and let it kind of serve its purpose as a snag and nobody would get hurt if it fell over, great, do it. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. I want to bring up the fact that not all trees are created equal. I want to talk about native trees versus introduced species like this ginkgo on the right. The ginkgo grows about the same size as the red oak and provides similar benefits to people. It's a durable tree. It tolerates very harsh urban conditions. It tolerates air pollution really well and drought. And it's a great tree. It virtually has very little problems. It doesn't need a lot of pruning and so on and so forth. But it supports little to no wildlife. So although it's a great tree to plant in urban situations, it really doesn't provide any food. We tend to, in urban situations, plant the male versions of this tree because the female version does produce fruit, but in an urban situation, you don't want it. Its fruit stinks. It smells really bad. And when it falls on the ground, it's a slippery mess. So we don't plant the female trees. And when we do, by accident, oftentimes they're removed for the very same reasons. So, oak trees are native. There's many native oaks other than the northern red oak. Red oaks are native to Long Island as well as white oaks, and there's a few other oaks that are native. But the natives definitely have some benefits that introduced species or alien species may not provide. Some do, but let's talk about what the benefits of natives are. Plant natives when possible in urban landscapes is really the way to go. According to the National Wildlife Federation, native plants help environments the most when they're planted in places that match their growing requirements. They will thrive in the soils, moisture, and weather of your region. That means that less supplemental watering will be needed, which can be wasteful, and pest problems that require toxic pesticides won't be needed. Native plants also assist in managing rainwater runoff and maintain healthy soil as their root systems are deep and keep soil from being compacted. Now let's talk a little bit about some native trees. This is a continuation of native. Native is defined as living or growing naturally in a particular area or region. Native plants have formed symbiotic relationships with native wildlife over the thousands of years and therefore offer the most sustainable habitat. A plant is considered native if it has occurred naturally in a particular region, ecosystem, or habitat without human introduction. That's a quote from the National Wildlife Federation. For native and migrating and non-migrating wildlife, native trees provide food resources at the right time with the right nutrients to support wildlife. That's just the way it is. And so why not choose natives to, bump up the nutrition value and the timing of when foods will be available for the wildlife. Here are some common natives used in urban landscapes. You might recognize many of them. I'm not going to really focus on these at this time, but I'm going to show you a few of the trees that provide an abundance of benefits to wildlife. The white oak produces acorns. This is it. This is what it looks like. Its overall natural growth habit. It's kind of a rounded shape. The acorns are produced in, usually they're produced every year, some years in greater abundance than others, some years maybe not at all. We call years of great abundance mast years. So if you get a lot of acorns one year, don't do what I hear a lot of people do. They cut the oak tree down because it doesn't happen like that every year. So, it runs in cycles. These are the flowers. Although they're not very conspicuous and maybe you don't even notice them, The flowers do provide a food source for pollinators. Oaks provide wonderful color in the fall, and this is the trunk. They feed all kinds of wildlife. Blue jays love it. Wild turkeys love acorns. It's probably the most favorite food of wild turkeys. And of course, deer love acorns as well. Acorns are not, well, acorns, if you grind the acorns down and make a flour out of it, humans do eat it, but they're not edible in a sense that you can just pick them up off the ground and pop them in your mouth type of thing. So don't try. Don't eat anything unless you know what you're eating. Flowering dogwoods are a native tree. They flower in the spring. The native dogwood produces these bright red berries that birds and other wildlife just loves. That's just a close-up of the flower and wonderful fall color. Eastern red cedar, it's a dense growing evergreen, provides lots of cover, protection from predators, nesting sites. They do produce a small berry. It's actually a cone because it is a conifer, but it's a soft cone. And many birds do eat the berries. Here, a cedar waxwing is eating the berries. They use juniper berries for flavoring gin. That's the scent or the flavoring produced from the juniper berries. And the eastern red cedar is native to Long Island. Eastern white pine, it is a keystone tree in and of itself. It does produce cones, lots of seeds, dense foliage that serves as a protective cover for escaping from predators, or nesting. It provides perches for predator birds like eagles. This is an American eagle. They need to be on a high perch in order to survey the landscape, looking for small animals, rodents, or fish in water. They find their food with their eyes, so they have a very keen sense of sight. So these trees benefit these kinds of species. Hawks especially too need these taller growing tree species. And that's all I'm going to cover right now on native trees. Let's move on to water and the importance that water plays for wildlife in our landscapes. We need clean water on Long Island in our bays and oceans for recreational activities, as well as for fish and supporting the economy that surrounds fishing. All wildlife needs water, clean water to survive, some for drinking, others depend on water for reproducing. Think of amphibians, frogs, salamanders. Of course, fish need good water quality to survive and thrive, and other aquatic life needs good clean water. Trees play a significant role in slowing stormwater runoff down, protecting groundwater quality, and preventing pollution from reaching the ponds, the lakes, the streams, the marshlands, and our bays and oceans. The downward movement of raindrops is slowed by tree leaves, branches, and trunks, allowing the water to flow more slowly down towards the ground, where it slowly can be soaked up by soil and roots instead of running off the surface of the land, streets, other paved areas, picking up pollutants that eventually wind up in the groundwater, streams, bays, oceans, etc., harming wildlife and people. Trees provide cover. In tree canopies, in tree canopies of both deciduous and evergreen trees is where a large percentage of wildlife find food, shelter, shelter to breed, to roost, to nest, to raise young, to regulate body temperatures, to escape harsh weather conditions and predators, to safely hide. The animals in these pictures, a screech owl, a tree squirrel, gray squirrel, obviously the bald eagle. This is a brown bat. They're common on Long Island. They are often found in trees. Chipmunks, which burrow among the tree roots often. Possums, tree dwellers. Of course, cardinals feed on berries that are produced in trees. And of course, raccoons are always looking for a tree, especially a hollowed out tree, cavities to raise their young in. So these cover is an important resource that trees provide. And wildlife uses all vertical levels of the forest. And trees play an important role in providing that. But even trees that are in not so good a shape, for instance, in this illustration here, you've got some borers, looks like they're under the bark here, and you've got something else going on here, and a branch must have fell here, or another tree fell over, a log is decaying. These are all providing benefits to wildlife. A living tree as well as a tree that's in decline or a tree that's dead. It all serves wildlife. So that's my main point here. And I talked a little bit about snags before. This is typically what a snag would look like. It's a tree that's dead. It's probably got, decay in it, some cavities, but it provides homes for, here's a squirrel in there, I believe is what's in there. This is a red-breasted nuthatch. Leaf litter from fallen leaves provides a habitat for producing these little critters here, the earthworms and other invertebrates that many of the wildlife lives off of. You'll find it under the leaf litter. This is a bronze birch borer. It's a pest problem of birch trees, but birds love to feed on both the adults and the larvae. This is the bronze birch borer larva. Woodpeckers love to find these and peck them out of the trees. This is a fallen pitch pine, and you see the galleries from the southern pine borer that devastated this tree. But the southern pine borers devastated some of the, killed off a lot of the pitch pines, but the borers and the adults of this insect served as food for some other animals in there. So it's all connected. Wildlife is always on the move, searching for food, water, protection, cover, and shelter, migrating to and from wintering or breeding grounds. It's not unusual for some songbirds to visit 15 or more locations for food in a single day, as natural resources are constantly in flux due to the seasonal nature of resources. In urban landscapes, wildlife territory for range and size can vary from a few hundred square feet for insects and small animals to thousands of square miles for birds, migrating insects like monarch butterflies and larger animals. This is a tree swallow on the left, and this is a map of its migration, a migratory map. So you can see that the range for this particular bird is, looks like tens of thousands of miles. So. In urban areas, wildlife habitats are often a fragmented patchwork of similar locations scattered throughout the urban landscape. If a habitat gets too small or disturbed, they might not use it. Vegetation, including trees, can connect several small isolated habitat areas in a landscape. So this is an example of what might happen in a particular situation. Connecting these blue areas, which are the habitat patches, might be a green corridor of trees, or it might be a fence row, it might be a piece of property that has some shrubs and some grassy areas that are left uncut. This provides sort of like a roadway to different wildlife habitats that may be around. This demonstrates a situation how trees strategically placed from one patch to another might help as stepping stones from one habitat to another. So these are things that you can do on your own property to help wildlife get from one habitat to another. And this is what it looks like, an aerial view of the reality of what some of the landscapes look like and how there are these habitats everywhere in a community. So in conclusion, trees and wildlife benefits everyone. It's all connected. We're all connected. We covered some of the benefits, and those are social benefits, economic benefits, educational benefits, health and well-being, environment and wildlife benefits. So trees and wildlife in combination provide all of these benefits to us and everyone in our community. I leave you with this quote and some of the wildlife that's out there that we need to consider and plant trees for the benefits that trees provide and the protection that they provide. I like this quote: plans to protect air and water, wilderness and wildlife are in fact plans to protect man. Stuart Udall was a politician. He was Secretary of the Interior around in the 1930s or so. So this is a famous quote that I've seen about our responsibility to ourselves as well as to all living things in the world. So I invite you to join us again in a few weeks. The presentation will be establishing a backyard ecosystem using urban trees. I will provide more focus on the trees themselves and the benefits that they provide. And these will be trees that would be well suited to urban landscapes here on Long Island, Nassau County, Suffolk County. So I invite you to join us again, December 14th, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. And you can find the information on our website at ccenassau.org on the events page. So with that, I bid you all a good night. If anyone has questions, we can maybe put them in the chat.
Thank you, Vinny. I think especially after this summer, a lot more of us have been getting outside and connecting with nature, or maybe spending some more time in our own backyards. And we've definitely seen an increase in the amount of inquiries and questions that we've received regarding, more birds or insects that people have been noticing in their environment. So hopefully this provided some good information for people looking to promote some of those beneficial wildlife in their own backyards. Just as a reminder, if you guys will be requesting any ISA CEU credits for attending this webinar, please put your full name and your ISA certification number in the chat. And we do have a couple questions. You guys can continue to put those in the Q&A section. But the first question we got is an excellent question. Are there any tree protection programs in any towns to maintain old growth trees so people don't cut them all down?
That is usually, yeah, there are some communities that have tree ordinances that require a permit to remove a tree even on private property. It's really a lot of the villages, because they're self-managing, they're independent of the town. They're often the communities that come up with these tree ordinances that protect trees. So they can be found online in the village ordinances, or you can call the village and ask them if there's a tree ordinance, and they can direct you to it. And there usually will be a permit process, which a lot of times, and they're all a little different, because all the villages are sort of coming up with these independently. That's Long Island. That's the way we have these overlapping, municipal entities that kind of make it challenging for everyone, including when you're trying to educate everyone about, urban forestry and caring for the trees in the community. But I would say that if you're in a community like a village, start with, going online, or visit the village hall, or give them a call and find out. So they usually require a permit that triggers a lot of times an inspection by someone in the municipality. Some of them have arborists on hand. Some of them work for the contractually, or some of them are part of the municipality staff. They'll come to your property and they'll find out what you want to do, and there may be a fee involved or not, but most of the time there is a fee, and there are rules that, if you take a certain size tree down, you may have to plant an equivalent number of inches of trunk diameter that's based on the tree that you're removing, planting some new trees that are smaller, but where you took down one tree, you may have to plant 2 or 3 trees to make up for the trunk diameter. Every village is different. So, but if you don't have an ordinance, let's work on it. Let's get together. Let's make it happen. We can help you with that.
All right, we do have one more question. Could you put up the slides with the native tree list again?
Sure.
And just as a reminder to everyone, these webinars are recorded. They will be available on our website at ccenassau.org. You can find them in the virtual learning section of our webinar. We'll be recording all these webinars in our Urban Trees in Your Backyard series, and you can also find recordings of previous webinars up on our website as well.
This is a very small list. It's some trees, some shrubs, but if you like it, and it's a good place to start. There's lots of trees. When I do the creating an ecosystem in December webinar, I'll share some resources on where you can find information like this. There's some good resources from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and they collaborate with the Audubon Society and other organizations as well. If you want to go to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has a website called All About Birds. Pretty much, I think this list came from that website. So it's a great place for anyone to go to, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, All About Birds website. There's lots of information on the website. More importantly, there's lots of very good do-at-home study. It used to be home study courses. Now you can sign up, and most of them are pretty, very reasonable in price. And you could do it at home on a laptop, and it's it's multi media. So, you read some copy, and then you click on a photo and it opens up a video, and you watch 10 minutes of video, and then you go back to reading. It's fun. It keeps you interested. And, I come back, I'm an old guy. So the way I learned about birds was I took the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's home study course, but they sent me this binder that was about 6 inches wide, and I had to go through page by page and read all the chapters, do the end of the chapter questions, mail it in, snail mail. This was before the internet. And then weeks later, you'd get the results back. And then upon completion of the whole thing, you get a certificate, to hang on the wall. But I must say that it was a great way to learn about birds, about the environment. It was bird biology. That was the topic, the home study. But I learned about native trees. I learned about so many other things about the ecosystem, studying bird biology. So it's very much worth it. So that was my commercial for Cornell's Lab of Ornithology. It's great programs there. Do we have another question?
We have another question here. Does the carbon capture of an old growth tree have a number of young tree equivalent?
Does the carbon capture of an old growth tree? Yeah, I mean, there are formulas, and I don't have them accessible here, but there is a formula that I think it's the EPA put out years ago about calculating the carbon sequestration of trees and the equivalents. So you can figure out what, by the size of the tree and the age of the tree, and you enter all of these factors into the formula, it comes up with a number, and then you can extrapolate that out into how many younger trees it would take to replace that. So yeah, the science does exist for that and the formula, but that's not something that I use every day. And I may have looked at it very, deeply once or twice, but I really have no practical use for it on a daily basis. So I'm not all that familiar with it. But if you email me, I will try to find it and email it to you.
All right, we have another question here, or a comment. I'm always surprised to see Virginia creeper listed on common native plant list as it is highly invasive. Can you please comment on that?
Well, it is invasive. It needs to be watched and checked and, cut back once in a while. It's not on any kind of a prohibited list or, absolutely banned list. But, then again, so is, English ivy. You just have to watch these things. It's sort of, because it provides, a food source, the berries for wildlife, it's worth putting into your landscape and managing it. Of course, that would be the responsible thing to do. I know it would, it spreads on its own by the seeds that are dispersed by the birds, but hey, it's everywhere anyway. So I don't know if it's a real issue. I'm sure that we could debate that if we were, one-on-one one day, but I think just being a responsible, citizen and managing it, I don't think you need to worry too much about it.
All right, well, that seems to be the last question that we have. Thank you all once again for joining us tonight. We have some upcoming webinars, continuing on Monday nights throughout the month of December. You can find a full listing and the registration links to the webinar on our website at ccenassau.org. And of course, if you have any questions, you may email us at nassau@cornell.edu.
Very good. Good night, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being with us.